Welcome to Compelling Conversations, where law meets business. With your host, Dara Rosenbaum, founding partner and attorney at Rosenbaum & Taylor in New York. You can watch episodes on YouTube and listen through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. For prior episodes and free resources, go to www.rosenbaumtaylor.com/learn. Now here's the host of Compelling Conversations, Dara Rosenbaum.
Hello and welcome to Compelling Conversations. My guest today is Paul Edwards. Paul wears many hats: ghostwriting agency owner, best-selling author, and master connector. Husband, father, older brother to younger men, amateur theologian, men's physique athlete, voice mimic, and recovering insurance salesman. A first-generation Spanish-speaking immigrant to the U.S. with African heritage and Middle East combat experience, Paul's lived in 5 different countries, speaks 2 languages, and holds 3 passports. Paul does one thing well. Okay, he wrote that. No, it's not just one thing, but he wrote that. Paul says he only does one thing well, or he does one thing well: communicate with people. When he isn't writing content for clients, you're most likely to find him speaking and building relationships with his network. So Paul, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Dara, it's so good to be here. So good to see you again, and looking forward to diving in. So let's get started.
Sounds good. So I will admit, and I think I've told you this, you are the first ghostwriter I've ever met. Just tell us, what's ghostwriting?
It's a number of things. I would like to say it's at a very simple level, it is channeling what the stories and the knowledge and the experience and wisdom that are gathered inside one person's soul into and filtering it through another and making it land on paper in a way that is readable, relatable, and informative, enlightening, whatever you're aiming to do. But I've since discovered that there's more to it than that.
And by the way, there's more to it, but that already sounds like a lot.
Well, I like to say I frequently get mistaken for a therapist. People like to tell me their stories, and they know that they sense about me. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, which generally means on the negative side, you can be quite depressive, but on the positive side, you're a deep sea diver of the soul. And so I just have a lot of room for people to tell me all kinds of things that they don't feel comfortable telling the average person.
Mm-hmm.
But I know how to turn that into a compelling story that presents an eternal, unchanging principle, and it sort of becomes almost like a before and after photo, like you would see in weight loss, except it has words instead of images. And so that's where we thrive. That's who we serve, like people who are in the business of personal growth, development, faith-based people. We really resonate strongly with that crowd, and the reason is we know how to tell that story in that open and closed loop format.
And what are you writing for those people?
We've done quite a few books in the last 2 years. We started out doing just digital content, and then the first few people began to crop up and say, "Hey, I'd like to write a book. Could you help us with that?" And so I said, yes. By that time had been published 3 times. So I knew enough about the process of taking someone through a book. And then in this year, we added a couple of new dimensions. And so I had somebody reach out to me earlier this year who said, "I don't want you to write the book for me. I just want you to help me get to the end. I've been trying to write a book for 10 years and I can't do it. And I get to 3,000 words and I get stuck." And 3,000 words is about the length of one chapter on average. And so we worked together for, what's that?
Not quite enough.
Not enough. No.
Yeah.
But this client and we worked together for 3 months, and he got to 60,000 words, and then he went to editing and publishing. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can slice that, but at the end of it, what I've discovered is something that's actually very parallel with what I understood when I was in the insurance business, and I think this would roll over into a lot of service-based occupations, and that is that there's a lot of people who do what I do. There's a lot of people who do what you do,
Sure.
but only you and I have the unique relational network beyond the mere service that we perform,
Hmm.
that we can connect our clients to and get them in front of opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't. And
Sure.
that's, to me, is the unique selling point.
That's wonderful. Now, so what's the connection? I mean, I know you're a master connector, something you love doing. What's the connection between ghostwriting and networking or connecting?
I would say the first thing I noticed was, um, when I was learning to network as an insurance salesman, it was much more powerful for somebody besides myself to recommend me as a provider.
Hmm.
It was, nobody wanted to talk about insurance to begin with. And insurance salesmen have this sort of stereotype, which is in a lot of cases is fairly true,
Yeah.
of just being, hounding you and all of that.
Hmm.
But when people would post on Facebook saying, I'm looking for an insurance agent, who do you recommend? And 6 out of 10 people say my name.
Yeah.
I'm like, my message is sinking in.
Hmm.
Like I'm transmitting my message into these people somehow. They're picking up on it from interacting with me, and they're
Right.
saying, if you're going to hire somebody to do this, this is the guy you should hire. So
Right.
they're saying the message for me. They, in a way, I have ghost written. They have ghost written my message to that person who's looking for help. That
Very
was the
interesting.
first
I
thing.
like that.
Yeah, it's like you're spreading a message by becoming a connector, and it
Hmm.
just filters down automatically, and people come out of the woodwork, and you don't even have to look for them.
I like
So
that a lot. Yeah.
yeah, so I said I'm taking the opposite position here. I'm the channel through which the message is going, right?
Hmm.
And for a much more particular concrete purpose, like something you can actually hold in your hands.
Right.
But it's same general principle. You want to become a faithful emissary of that message.
Hmm.
And so that's why we're selective about who we work with, because we want to make sure that those people prioritize the same values that we do.
Right. And you don't want to do that game of telephone where something gets transmitted from one person to another, and the message gets completely distorted. It sounds like you want to be very faithful to, the way that the person is trying to tell that story, and you're sort of telling it for them, or you're interpreting it for them. Is that accurate?
In ancient Yeah, in ancient times that was an occupation, right? If one kingdom wanted to send a message to another, they appointed emissaries
Hmm.
who were actually trained to carry that message faithfully as an
Interesting.
ambassador, much as an ambassador is today, right? So
Yeah, interesting. Absolutely, absolutely. So what's there's obviously a storytelling component to what you're doing with your clients. How do you get that from the storytelling where they feel very comfortable telling you things and describing things to you? How do you translate that into content for them?
yeah. What we've found is, there's this old saying, facts tell and stories sell.
Hmm. I like
And
that.
for years, I would hear that and I would say, sounds nice, but I don't really understand what it means."
Hmm.
I understand what it means now. So story is the language of the human heart. And so as an example, you go to a family reunion, you go to a meetup with friends you haven't seen in a while, and the first thing you do is tell stories.
Of course.
Oh, you're not going to believe what happened to my car.
Hmm.
You wait till you hear what happened to Aunt so and so, right?
Hmm.
It's the way we build connection and trust, and reduce the degrees of separation in between each other.
Hmm.
If you write a book where you're just talking about facts and, you know the database knowledge, um, unless you're writing to a very highly technical crowd that says, I need to know that information all lines up,
Hmm.
most of the time you're not. Most of the time what you're trying to do is paint a picture that
Right.
that reader can see themselves in.
Hmm.
And so the best way to do that authentically, not making it up, is with your own stories.
Hmm.
And what most people fail to do, I think this is, you and I met through a networking group, right? And
Yeah,
I've
we did.
I've been in a lot of networking groups. I've written a book about it, and I've
Hmm.
said, I don't like going to networking groups and doing the usual surface level chit chat.
Right.
So I have a method. We have questions that we ask and ways that we approach people that get below the surface very quickly. Not
Hmm.
20 miles deep, but
Hmm.
just a little bit lower than average, enough that you distinguish yourself as a communicator, and people begin to feel very comfortable telling you things that they ordinarily don't go around sharing.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. And I will share that. I think I know I've shared this in a video that I've actually posted on LinkedIn, I believe. And I know I tagged you, but I'm not sure how many people realize that it was you. But one of the things that really stood out to me when we first met was I asked the standard question I asked, which is, who can I introduce you to? Who might you want to be connected with? And you didn't give me that litany of like, I'd like these people in these professions at these levels with these titles. You started describing to me the values and the principles and, sort of the types of people you wanted to meet from a character perspective. And I said, when I did the videos, that was the first time that it ever happened to me, where somebody was describing to me, the character and the morals of the people they wanted to meet, as opposed to what their titles and what their industry should be. And that still stands out to me from the first time we met.
I'm grateful to hear that, and I'm pleased that that you brought that up. And the reason is, I think automatically by taking a stance like that, I'm going to polarize, and I'm going to define this is who I'm not, and versus this is who I am. This is who I want to hang around. And I have very good reasons for that. You can imagine what they are, but when you do that, the right people begin to gravitate towards you, and you repel the wrong people, which you don't want to work with them anyway. And I've had a few of those people turn up just by accident, and it doesn't take me long to figure out when someone's inconsistent with your values, and it's not like inconsistent, like felony level inconsistent. They just have different values, right?
Sure.
Then it makes it very easy to determine how far do I want to go with this person.
Right.
And I love that, so I can meet people who are in the industries where I have done the majority of my work, and they don't fit the bill at all.
Sure.
They don't.
So I guess that kind of gets to the question of, what's the process when someone's working with a ghostwriter? What's the process? Because it sounds like it's very personal. And, that's sort of the relationship that you're trying to build. There is that kind of relationship with the kinds of people you want to associate with and you kind of want to work with. So what's that process of somebody working with your agency?
Well, at a technical level, it's usually a matter of one-on-one interviews. That's the majority of the work the client does up front. And then if you're working on books, there's a time where you're also doing editing, revising, making changes, the cutting floor, as I like to call it.
Okay, sure.
But I think that all sounds kind of technical. What I really want to emphasize in answering this question is, I'm going to borrow from a video that I did recently, and it's on LinkedIn as well as my other social media handles, where I talked about this idea of being inspired. And I think that, coming from the faith background that I do, I had this image in my head of inspiration suddenly seizing someone up, like, and then they get this instant download, like in the Matrix or something, like when the agents try to take over something. And I'm like, that's never happened to me, and I've never seen it happen to anyone. I've seen people get ideas, right? But see, here's a far likelier version of what that really means. A client sits through an hour interview session with me, and they verbally dictate to me what they generally want to say.
Okay.
Right. They spill their guts on how they feel about this subject or their experience with this subject. And here's the, we're coming into that eternal principle that doesn't change. And we identify those pieces. And then I go away and write. And when I come back, they go, that is exactly what I wanted to say. I couldn't find those words to save my life. But when I read it, I was like, there it is.
Right.
And you can tell by the look on their face, right? And I'm sitting there like, I was just hoping you'd like it. And I'm like, okay, so this is what inspiration looks like, right? And I think I would say, more than any technical definition I could give you of the process, those are the moments I have over and over and over again. And people read what I've written after they have dictated to me what their thoughts are. And they're like, that's absolutely brilliant. That's exactly what I just, how did you do that? And I'm like, I just listened to what you said, and I just wrote it the way I know how to write it. So
yeah. Now, I'm guessing that some of the problem with people trying to, beyond the skill level, obviously, and the time, people trying to do their own content or their own books is the procrastination factor. So, what does the timing look like when somebody's working with you? I mean, is it a big time commitment? What's the kind of the work process?
yeah, so this has a couple of different answers. First, what I usually tell people is, for an intense project like a book, plan on 3 to 4 months at the most, right?
Okay.
90 to 120 days. And
Mhm.
that's what we have never missed a deadline. We were able to produce that volume of work in that time period.
Mhm.
The more important answer that I really want to get at with timing, though, is not so much how long does it take us, but where are you on the uh, life cycle of using what we generate for you as a marketing tool?
Okay.
Because a lot of people think, right, I write a book and then somehow it sells 1 million copies. No, that model is
No.
long gone, right?
Right.
And if you're if somehow you are making that, then you're like J.K. Rowling, where you've got a whole suite of books and a
Right.
massive PR firm that's promoting it around the clock, plus amusement parks and all the branding that's taking that. So
And
most authors,
probably not true for most of my listeners and viewers.
not true for most nonfiction professional business owner executive.
Right.
No,
Right.
unless you are, Jeff Bezos or something, then you can write a
Mhm.
book, and yeah, probably. But
And by the way, Jeff, if you're listening, call me.
yeah, exactly. Um, so what I tell people is, think of the timing as, I am in a position relationally, and I am in a position, uh, for what comes after my book, for
Mhm.
the investment to make sense.
Okay.
And so for example, right, if you could say that if I do this book and I spend 25K to get it done,
Mhm.
but I get 3 clients and they each pay me 100K, then that's pretty safe bet, right? And all I've got to
Sure.
do is get 3 clients with it, by giving
Mhm.
it out and promoting it.
Right.
If by contrast I spend 25K and I get 3 clients that pay 5K, well, I'll make some of that back, but how fast will I get those clients?
Right.
If it's a slow sales cycle, it might not be worth it.
Okay.
Um, Also, do I have a list of raving fans who will interview me, promote it, share it,
Mhm.
recommend it, tell
Right.
people about it,
Mhm.
publish excerpts of it? If you don't have that, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's generally not a good time to start writing on a big project like a book. It's much better to start building your relationship, your relational capital,
Mhm.
and working on content in the background so that you can, blow up your ranking, increase your profile,
Mhm.
establish some level of credibility, and then attack with the big project.
It's interesting because it sounds to me like you're saying there are people who come to you and you may, I wouldn't say talk them out of it, but at least to have them defer writing the book. That you're not going to try to get everybody who comes to you and say, like, this is, yeah, if you came to me, this is the time you should be writing a book. It sounds like there are people who are probably not yet ready for that based on sort of where they are in their cycle.
Yeah, yeah, and that doesn't mean that there's no work to be done right away. What I tell people is, if you have a vision,
Mhm.
let's do a microcosm of that vision. So we do like a paid strategy session for $500, right? And we get
Mhm.
on the phone for 90 minutes. I get on Zoom for 90 minutes, and we
Mhm.
flesh out, this is what the book's going to look like, and this is your strategy for taking it to the market once you've completed it. At
Okay.
that point, they're they're out $500 and that's it, right?
Right. Mhm.
They can either DIY that project or they can come back to us later if they want to work with us, and it's
Mhm.
deductible towards their fee. But at least they have something, and at least they don't feel like they just got all excited and then they forget about it. They've got a plan. They've got something they
Mhm.
can come back and revise or they can execute on. So I
Mhm.
don't tell people don't do anything. I tell people that you need to have a couple things in place before you want to do these heavy lifting things like writing a book,
Mhm.
because otherwise you're going to get halfway into writing it and you're going to say, I'm spending all this money, and you're going to get discouraged, or worse yet, you get it done, right? Then you have it and you can't do anything with it
Right. Right.
because it
Right.
doesn't just sell itself.
Mhm. For sure. Not unless you're Jeff Bezos or J.K. Rowling.
If you have that, but those people get picked up by the traditional publishing houses, and
Sure.
yeah, sometimes they'll bring a ghostwriter in to work with them. In fact, a lot of times they will. Um, and that's where you get the massive advances and all the royalties and stuff like that.
Right.
Average nonfiction expert trying to publish their wisdom and share it and get new clients with it, you don't carry that kind of brand name recognition, so it doesn't make sense.
Right. Sure. So once somebody goes through your process, what are they coming away with on the other side of working with you?
Several things. Speed, knowledge, accountability, and relationships are some of the top ones. So
Okay.
the book that took you 10 years to not even get close to finishing, it's
Right.
done in 3 or 4 months, right? The knowledge that you didn't have of all the components you had to have in place to make it a good book is suddenly there. It's all
Right.
there for you. You don't have to think of all these details. We'll think of them for you. Now it doesn't mean you don't do any work, right? You've got to write your acknowledgement section, right? Thank you to my beloved wife or husband and all that kind of stuff. And you've got to lean on relationships to get the book endorsed and to get someone to write a foreword. But we think of all those details. We walk you through the process. So that's the knowledge piece. The accountability, right? We're meeting weekly and we're setting benchmarks and say, this needs to be done by this date. This needs to be done by this date. This needs to be in place, or you need to have a plan for this once we're done, because if you don't, you're just going to have a very expensive Google Doc.
Right. Exactly. Not going to do much for you. Right.
No. And then the relationships, right? The relationships is all the places, all the people we know that we can connect you with, we can plug you into. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. A current client, we're finishing a project. He belongs to a certain denomination of the church. And I went to a university that is also of that denomination. And so a very natural fit, right, would be for his book to show up at that university. And so that's a relationship that I can tap into and say, hey, would you be open to receiving a couple copies of this man's book to distribute it in your business school, to distribute, to wherever you feel is appropriate for your students. But also, right, that's just another way of getting your name out there.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, there's in amongst our team, there's and with me, with all of the relationships I have, there's always places I can plug you in that you would never get into or think to approach otherwise.
So how do you get from the military to insurance salesman to ghostwriting agency? I mean, how do those pieces all fit together? I mean, the common denominator seems to me to be, well, actually, I guess there isn't. I can't figure one. How about you tell me what the common denominator there is?
I'm learning to reframe this. I used to think the common denominator was a series of rather bad decisions, but it wasn't just that.
That's not as inspiring as it could be, Paul.
No. And that's why I'm reframing it, is because
Fair enough.
Although the decisions were made kind of rashly, as you do when you're a young man, especially, right? We just lickety split. Oh, I guess I'll just go join the army. I mean,
sure.
I had been feeling it. It was just after 9/11. I wanted to be part of something. I didn't know what was going to happen. In hindsight, there's probably some things I would have done differently knowing what I know now, but I can't go back and change that. And it's led me here. So I wouldn't know what I know now if I hadn't gone that route.
Sure.
Insurance, I came out of the military, finished my degree, and I was hoping to get into radio broadcasting. I've got the voice and all that.
I was just gonna say, everyone tells you, I'm sure you got the voice for it.
But I couldn't get it to work. I live equidistant between the two nearest major markets, but they're both, an hour and a half or more drive away. So in order for me to actually pursue that, I was going to be spending my life on the road and in a radio station.
Right.
And it just didn't. So insurance, it was the bottom of the recession, like 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. And I just came across this opportunity I was looking on Craigslist, actually. And they were talking about, becoming an agent. And I didn't really want to become an agent, but I did want to learn how to sell.
Okay.
Because I hadn't done well with sales. And I found myself with an opportunity to go work for like the number one agent of this particular insurance company in the state.
Let me
And
just
so
stop
I
you there.
said,
It's very
well,
interesting that you said, I wanted to learn how to sell because I hadn't done very well with sales. I think many people who hadn't done well with sales would say either it's not for me or I don't like it. So I think there's something about your personality there that says, I don't know how to do this well. I want to learn. So just needed to call that out because I think that's something that not everybody has inside them.
well, by the time I made this decision, having been through the military, my attitude had shifted. So when I was much younger, I would have said the same thing, but now, I'm in my early 30s. I've been overseas, I've been blown up, I've been shot at, I've fired upon, and I'm like, sales doesn't scare me. I don't mind getting rejected as long as I
Fair
also get
point. Very,
accepted
very,
from
very
time
fair
to time.
point. Yeah.
Right?
It's a little bit of
When
a
you're
different
getting
perspective.
100% rejection, then you have a problem, right?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
But 20% acceptance rate, that's fine with me,
That's fine. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So yeah, going and especially like the way it's evolved now in the age of the internet, it's become so much more adapted to my personality type, relational selling versus transactional and just, hardcore closing type of stuff. I don't do that. Um, to me, sales and service are interchangeable terms. The way I sell the best is when I'm focused, when the sale is I'm totally indifferent to the outcome, and I'm focused solely on serving the person in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that.
So to circle back and finish on your question, insurance lasted about 6 years, and I learned to network, but I was not the son of an insurance agent. I had no previous background with it. It didn't particularly float my boat. The relationship building did, but doing the actual billable work and, policies and all that, it's kind of mind numbing for me.
Right. Okay.
But writing, I've been a gifted writer all my life. I attempted to write my first autobiography at age 8. I was
Well,
winning
there's a lot to
spelling
share
bees.
you've been through a lot by that point when you're 8. You have a lot
You
of
have.
wisdom to share.
I had all kinds of perspective. I had solved several of the world's problems already, and I was determined to share what I'd
A
learned.
savant.
Yes. I took this lifetime of literary talent in abundance, right? I had been excellent speller, excellent grammar nerd. Boggled my mind how people didn't pay attention to that stuff.
Right.
But I learned not to be a snob about it, while still being a snob to myself about it.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
Good combination. Yeah.
I took that, and then there was this other thing that I just knew how to do it. It's a gift from God. I don't want any credit for it. Is the mimic, and so when I was a kid, I could imitate voices and imitate other people's mannerisms and their personality to some extent.
That must have been fun as a kid and potentially dangerous, depending on who you were mimicking, right?
The absolute the people who loved it the most were the soldiers, right? So you look for any way to take your mind off of the hardship, and one of the ways that I was always able to do it for them was I did the impressions of the colonel, right? And everybody likes has this
That must have
sort of
been good.
love-hate relationship with the colonel, and so I would walk around and then they'd say, Edwards, do the impression of the colonel. Do the impression of the colonel. Right?
I like it.
So, but when it came to writing, so what most people don't do when they write is they'll write a message and then they don't think to edit it. And so they send it and they wonder why it doesn't resonate, or people get confused or offended or whatever. And so for me, I'm sitting there, I've now got somebody who's engaged me to actually write for them. He says, I want it in my voice.
Right.
And I said, okay. And the reason I said I know that I can do that is because I'm not just going to write it, I'm also going to edit it. And when I go and edit it, I don't just read what I've written. I read it out loud because I know my ears will catch the errors that my eyes miss. So then I said to myself, well, what if I read it back to myself in this guy's voice, but I do an impression of him while I'm reading it?
Oh, that's hysterical. So you've actually been able to use the voice mimicry as part of the editing process.
And therein lies the secret of not sounding like Paul Edwards on paper, of sounding like someone else.
That's really, that's very cool. That's a cool way to use that talent that you have, so that you're
figured it had to be good for
in
something.
that person's voice.
I figured it had to be good for something besides the occasional water cooler, make everybody laugh type thing. That's valuable, but
Do all of
you
your
can't.
clients say like, okay, so do me back to me, and they want to hear that?
What? Yeah. So some of them do.
Mhm.
Some of them have no
And some of them
idea that I
probably
do
don't.
that. They have no idea, right? I don't really talk about that with them,
Right.
unless they're really curious. But what happens is, particularly with the first client I was telling you about there,
Mhm.
uh, his organization, he has for a chief operating officer his own adult daughter.
Mhm.
And she came to me one day and she had this piece of paper in her hand and she showed it to me. She said, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "I can't tell. This is you?" I said, "Yes, it
Mhm.
is." She said, "I thought it was my dad who wrote it."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Well, if I'm fooling the boss's daughter,
Mhm.
I guess I'm doing something right."
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so yeah, I mean, and then my team, they're not all necessarily gifted mimics, but they can listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos and see how a person speaks, and then they can say, okay, they'll write it out, and they've learned. I've trained them how to edit it properly, and so
Mhm.
we get compliments like that all the time. It's like, it sounds like me, it reads like me,
Right.
it is me, and I'm like, yeah,
Right.
because we listen and then
Mhm.
we write it in a way that makes sense on paper.
And that's when you get the people saying like, "Aha, not only does it sound like me, but it sounds better than I could have said it, and you found the words I wasn't finding."
The collaboration part is huge.
Yeah, it sounds like
The
it.
inspiration part. So, you know, were you to tell me a story
Mhm.
of a case you argued or something, and it's got a good emotional component to it,
Mhm.
and you were fumbling for exactly the expression of how to illustrate it,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden this starts ringing my bell. There's an anecdote of mine. Even though I'm not an attorney, I've never tried a case, I've never done that, but I recognize there's a dramatic component to
Mhm.
going to trial, right?
Yep, sure.
And I would throw something out there like that as an example.
Mhm.
One client we wrote for is a financial advisor, and he was trying to describe the how there 99% of people manage their wealth over their lifetime poorly.
Mhm. Mhm.
1% manage it very well. And he said, "I'm looking for a good analogy of this, and I'm thinking of like salmon swimming upstream.
Mhm.
Most salmon are just crowding and crowding and trying to get up there, and then off to the side, maybe there's one that's just going the longer way upstream, and he's going slowly, but he'll get there."
Mhm.
And I said, "Yes." And then along the riverbanks, there's a grizzly that people, picks off from the big crowd of salmon, and that's the IRS. And he said,
Mhm.
"That's perfect."
Yeah.
So, you know,
Mhm.
so
The
yeah,
collaboration.
the collaboration is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So Paul, you've obviously had a pretty incredible life, and I mean that just the number of things that you do and the things that the experiences that you've had is pretty amazing and inspiring. What's one thing that you've learned along the way that you wish you'd known earlier?
Hmm. I've got so many of those. I'm going to have to think of one in particular here. I'll tell you the one that I'm learning lately,
Okay,
since it's fresh and since it's real.
sure.
There is a tendency for people, especially like me, to regard failure
Hmm.
as a sign of a character defect or a manufacturer's defect, right? Almost like there's
Hmm.
something just inherently wrong with me and it's always going to be that way.
Hmm.
I'm semi-damaged goods
Okay.
because of my failure.
Hmm.
So the failures that I've had in business, the failures I've had personally, spiritually, on and on and on.
Hmm.
And through a lot of thinking and journaling and praying and reading and studying and reflection, all this kind of stuff,
Hmm.
I've come to a place where I've said I can no longer regard my failures as total, abject, 100% failures.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to say they were absolute runaway successes, but
Right.
there was a success in each and every one of them because I couldn't be who I am today unless I knew what it was like to go through that failure. I couldn't empathize with my fellow human beings who are going through it. A lot of the young men that I've mentored, I couldn't empathize with them if I didn't know what it was like to be in their shoes.
Right.
And so therefore I have to count it as a win, even though there was no big reward. In fact, there was a lot of pain associated with it. I'm learning to embrace the pain I caused myself and not detest it or look down on it or cringe at it or anything like that.
That's really, really powerful. I like that a lot. Thank you. So how can people find you? How can people find your agency? How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about ghostwriting or any of the other things we've talked about?
I am about to, not today, but very soon we will have a website, meetpauledwards.com.
Okay.
Meet, MEET, pauledwards.com. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn, and I'm starting to actually become active on several other platforms as well. But LinkedIn is where I do spend most of my time.
Okay.
Looking for people who need what I do and that kind of thing. So I would recommend the handle is I think I changed it to @Meet Paul Edwards on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So
great. Well, I'll make sure we get that correct, and we'll put it in with the show notes when we post the episode.
Awesome. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Paul, this has been a great conversation. Loved learning more about what you do and who you are, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Dara. Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.